Jean-Paul Servais, now chair of IOSCO, the International Organization of Securities Regulators. And Jean-Paul, you are kept very busy across the board, of course, in IOSCO with your agenda, but also in particular this year around crypto assets, digital assets in the widest sense. And I'd be very interested to hear what IOSCO is doing, how you fit into the work of the FSB, and what we can expect from you this year. Thanks for being with us.
So, good evening, and thanks for the invitation. It's a real pleasure, ladies and gentlemen, to have this possibility to exchange with you. So good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone. So maybe some comment, if I may, Nick, about, first of all, our underlying philosophy and why IOSCO. So as everybody knows, crypto asset, digital assets, by definition, are a cross-border business. So it means cross-border business means cross-border risk, I would say. And especially, I would say, due to the fact that crypto asset is one of the mechanisms for which you can have a direct link between a very sophisticated manufacturer, a very sophisticated manager, and on the other hand, I would say John and Mary in the streets, so unsophisticated retail investors. And that's precisely, I would say, the DNA. It's part of our mission statement as far as the IOSCO is concerned. Second aspect, which is very important for us, I would say, of course, cross-border, so it means IOSCO must be on board. It means also that same risk means, I would say, same kind of supervision. And that's very important because we are convinced in the IOSCO ecosystem that to some extent we can use some tools which we are used to working for many years. For instance, about traditional trading venues. Some of these principles, which are well known in the IOSCO and outside the IOSCO system, are in fact part of the well-known core principle developed, published for many years by the IOSCO about for the sake of the quality of the supervision of financial market. It's not a surprise due to the fact that we already took the same approach, even if there is no link, I would say, from a conceptual point of view, with, the unregulated carbon market. Nick, that during the COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh last year in November, we published two reports about the two well-known unregulated carbon market. And again, starting point was to say, in fact, we could think about the implementation of well-known core principles. And the reason for doing that is that I think that we can assume the fact that this principle works very well. You wouldn't be surprised, Nick, if IOSCO will publish some principle, of course, about what it means, how to avoid conflict of interest when we speak about crypto conglomerates of, I would say, vertically integrated platform managing crypto assets. The same about custody and client asset protection, which is a key issue in what we have been forced to see last year. The same about market manipulation, insider trading and fraud. And the same also about operational technological risk. And of course, retail access, suitability and distribution. And last but not least, cross-border risk, because we think at IOSCO a level that we have a successful story with our well-known MMOU about the exchange of information related to, for instance, possible case of cross-border market abuse in cyber trade. And that's the reason why we decided not 1 month ago, not 2 months ago, but last year in March, to launch a new crypto asset fintech task force. So it means before what happened with FTX and the collateral damage around, I would say, the story related, for instance, to FTX. We decided that to launch in March. This task force is chaired by our colleague and friend from Singapore, Tuan Lee, And it means that the issue of crypto asset regulation is a priority, will be a priority, but has been a priority for IOSCO since 2017. However, let us be clear, we decide to promote this regulatory agenda. And it was again, I repeat that, before the FTX collapse. So that's the reason why we created a fintech task force at both levels. What does it mean a task force? We have different kind of work streams at IOSCO level. We can have standing committee, we can have network. A task force means that the objective with a task force is not to be as such, I would say, a never-ending story. A task force has the main objective, but of course there is no one-size-fits-all approach. But in the case of fintech, the objective is to propose to IOSCO discussion and possible endorsement. And the objective of this task force is to deliver IOSCO proposal, IOSCO standards on fintech and crypto assets, and also, of course, very important, to coordinate with the FSB and other standard setting bodies on related issues, Basel Committee, for instance. So again, the objective is from day one to work, I would say, in a kind of partnership with the FSB. And that's what we are used to doing in many other aspects. NBFI, let us be clear. Sustainable finance, again, and other aspects. I have also to say, Nick, that I would say the mandate, the initial mandate, went beyond crypto. I think that I may say it was already explained publicly by IOSCO representative that over the next 12 to 18 months, the fintech task force is not a surprise. Will focus on the regulation on crypto assets. It's not a surprise because in the meantime, I would say it's also high on the agenda in Basel. I had the pleasure to be around the table at all levels in the FSB ecosystem as chair of the IOSCO, and I think that everybody in the room, and I know that there are many people attending the conference, had the possibility to read the letters, the traditional letter sent by Knas Knot, the current chair of FSB, to the G20, just after the plenary meeting in December. I presume that everybody had the possibility to feel, I would say, the drafting news. It's on page 2, first paragraph, if my memory is not too bad, saying, first of all, sense of urgency, I would say. Second aspect, need, absolute need for more cooperation across board level, I would say, especially with the so-called non-cooperative jurisdiction. So it means that there is a momentum to make progress, that there is no pushback, generally speaking, and that everybody knows that if we want to make progress in order to enhance the level of supervision of this crypto conglomerates, that starting point, it's about cross-border cooperation. And for this, FSB and IOSCO, and of course at regional level, ESMA, have to play an important role. It would be absolutely non-professional to think that we can manage all the stuff at a national level. And that's the reason why IOSCO decided to launch, I would say in March last year, this task force. And the objective of the IOSCO task force is to develop, I would say, a principle-based approach, as we believe that the same activities that represent the same risk should be subject to the same regulatory. And to do this, we are examining the extent to which IOSCO guidance and principle already apply to the key risks identified. We are also conducting data gap analysis to ensure that the work is well documented. And the objective, let us be clear, is to come back as soon as possible to the industry, to the decision-making process, to the representative of consumer, in order to see to which extent we can launch the debate. And the objective is to publish consultation report for this work stream in the first half of this year. So it means that our consultation report will be, normally speaking, available before the end of this year. Yeah, that's very fast. But let us be clear, when you have to tackle this issue, you need, of course, to have, I would say, the most appropriate decision-making process, to conduct, of course, consultation process, and then to be able to deliver, especially at international level. We are not alone, and the objective, of course, I would say, business as usual, is to work in partnership with the FSB, and especially with the crypto asset group, which has also been launched for financial stability issue. FSB means financial stability issue. IOSCO means consumer protection, and how to avoid conflict of interest, how to manage custody and client asset protection. I think that the interaction is an excellent one, and the objective is now to come back to the market, I would say, with more or less the same time.
For setting out the work program of IOSCO and what we can expect in the course of this year, and setting out how it interacts with the work of the FSB, which I think it's important to see the interconnection between the two. And I think you set it out very nicely with the FSB being responsible for systemic risk or risk management, but IOSCO taking a more focused look at conflicts of interest and investor protection aspects, among others, of course. But coming back to the cross-border dimension, of course this is important for IOSCO. You're the global body of securities regulators. But we are seeing, at least for the moment, a slightly diverse approach being taken by some of your members. Japan has gone for an integrated regulatory approach. The EU is going for an integrated approach through MiCA. Others are much earlier in development. And then you mentioned some slightly smaller jurisdictions, where you didn't refer to them explicitly, but some smaller jurisdictions that might be sitting on lovely sunny islands or in the middle of some deserts or whatever you want to pick it out. How do you bring that convergence in an environment where there's also clear competition for market share and what could be an important new departure in financial services, and more importantly, despite FTX, in the medium term, potentially an interesting strategic financial infrastructure?
Well, what you are telling, Nick, about the landscape, I would say that's the best marketing tool, I would say, from the IOSCO. I belong to the group of supervisors who think that there is no competition between what we have to do at national level, at regional level, and at international level. The advantage we have at the level of IOSCO is that I think that I may say that IOSCO is one of the few real global membership organizations, I would say. We have on board, I would say, more than 130 jurisdictions. So it means not only G20 members, but also, I would say, growth and emerging markets. The majority of our colleagues are, in fact, representative of growth and emerging markets. And we know that, by definition, I would say, crypto assets are something which I would say give, the opportunity to have some bridge risk between different kind of market, different kind of level of financial education. For this, IOSCO is the place to be, like for, I would say, asset management and sustainable finance. Why? Just because IOSCO members are, in fact, involved with various capacity in the supervision of 95% of the financial sector all around the world. So if you want to define, I would say, principle about related or devoted to the quality of the supervision at cross-border level, by definition, I would say we must knock on the door of IOSCO, because it means that we have the capacity to develop, of course, high-level principles. We know that on a consensus day, and the day that these principles are endorsed by the IOSCO board, it means much more capacity, much more incentive, I would say, to develop, to draft, but also to implement. We are not only speaking about regulation and new kind of paper. The objective is to ensure that these new standards, principles, to be applied to the supervision cross-border supervision of crypto conglomerates would be endorsed, but also would be implemented and supervised. I don't think that for this aspect there is a kind of competition, that would be clear. Of course, there are excellent initiatives. MiCA is a very useful one, but there are also other examples, I would say, with excellent framework also in Asia and other countries. But I think that I may say, when I see the quality of the discussion that we have for the time being at the level of the task force launched by the IOSCO, that we are on the same line. When you speak about aspects relating to conflict of interest arising from vertical integration of function and trading activities, everybody is on the same line. So no, competition is not about this. Maybe the problem that we have is that there is no supervision at international levels. But I think that if you start drafting principles about this, there are not so many possibilities to have a kind of, I would say, forum shopping. Everybody knows what you have to do when you speak about conflict of interest. How to ensure an appropriate custodian client asset protection. We know what we've been able to do at international level for the sake of the supervision of classical trading venue. And then it was translated at European level and at national level, if we speak about Europe. The same for market manipulation. CRA have been developed at IOSCO level, then translated at EU level. The same for benchmark. Let us be clear. You always have the same approach. High-level principle at international level, fine-tuning, I would say, and appropriation at EU level, and then dissemination information at national level. And when you see the situation about what happened in some collapses of well-known, that's the absence of appropriate custodian client protection. And we know that we can have the two. And the fact that IOSCO could be able, first of all, to publish consultation reports, second, to work, and it will be the case, with the working group chaired, as you know, by Stephen Mayor, at the level of FSB, that's the best answer. People, I would say decision maker, at national level, at regional level, are only interested in one objective, to be able to use as soon as possible one toolkit. And this toolkit, I would say, you cannot expect revolution for many things. When you speak about, I would say, how to avoid conflict of interest, how to ensure an appropriate level of custody, how to avoid market manipulation, how to, I would say, to ensure an appropriate level of suitability. These are principles for which you just need action to find a consensus and then to implement. And that's what we are doing. And frankly speaking, I don't see any pushback because everybody knows what we have to do. Except that this case, I would say, the job has to be done from scratch in many aspects and immediately at international level. Because by definition, this kind of business means risk and question by definition at international level. And by definition, IOSCO must deliver on this, and that's what we are doing. I have three priorities. There are many works to do. But these three priorities for this year, as chair of the IOSCO, it's sustainable finance, NBFI, and crypto assets. The common aspect between these three works is about speed. Because people are waiting, I would say, and we need to be there. And I'm sure that we'll be able to do that with the support of the FSB.
No, thank you. And to be honest, in a way, I was kind of a bit provocative because I entirely it's my job. But I totally agree with you because I think if you go back in the history of IOSCO was at the forefront of developing standards, as you say, and you used the example of benchmark administrators and others, credit rating agents as well before anybody else thought about it. And in many areas, commodities, you've developed standards that then were taken on. And I totally agree with you. And I think you're starting from scratch, but not quite, because you can use a lot of the concepts, as you say, from other standards. The principles do, to a certain extent, continue to apply. But you do raise a really interesting point, I think, if I not misrepresent you. And you face one challenge, and that is the scope. because when it is a security and what to do with the security, it's easier to potentially define a standard. Here, part of the challenge of MiCA and part of the challenge of the SEC and CFTC and its competence is to define what is a crypto asset, what is the demarcation between a security, a commodity, and another type of crypto asset. And maybe that's part of the work for this year, but how do you go about defining what animals you want to put within a regulatory framework or want to put within the cage?
Yeah. Well, I think that there are two important words. First of all, about, I would say, the choice of principle for which we think that there is a capacity and added value to implement this core principle also to the sector of cross-border platform. I already referred to that. I think that the choice would be quite obvious. We need to fine-tune and to see to which extent we need to adapt some aspect from a technical point. The second aspect, and I presume that everybody was able to read the very tough drafting in the letter sent by Klaas to the G20 after the FSB plenary meeting. So the famous first paragraph on page 2, classical diplomatic, but at the same time, I would say, if you know a little bit the history of the FSB and even before the FSC, it means a real tough document. So it means need for cooperation with non-cooperative jurisdiction. Therefore, I think that working with the IOSCO is a real added value. I'm used to saying, as you know, Nick, the best marketing tool for IOSCO, it's a well-known MMOU related to exchange of information between IOSCO and member in order to prevent, detect, and fight cases of market abuse or insider trading. We are just celebrating now the birth, I would say the anniversary of the signature of the first MMOU. I was already there, but as vice chair this time in Belgium. It was 20 years ago. Okay? 20 years ago, I would say the statistic means 50 cases of exchange of information. After 20 years, it means 5,000 multiplied by 100. If you are explaining that to a public prosecutor in many jurisdictions, they won't believe you. And the speed. In Belgium, I have the pleasure to receive answer to my information. First of all, in 95% of my demand, and in less than 100 days. So the speed is absolutely instrumental. So there are some principles that we could also use for a new kind of MMOU. Let us be clear, in Asia, our colleague and friends from the Asian and Pacific Regional Committee developed a bespoke MMOU for some aspect relating to this new kind of exchange information. Working with the IOSCO means also that you work with a truly global organization and the capacity also to work with, I would say, MMOU of other instruments that we are used to work with. That's also an advantage. We don't start from scratch. And besides, I would say, we have the capacity to work with instruments, MMOU, which are the best marketing tool. And that's, I think, very important. It's not only about principle, it's also about the quality of supervision between different member states. And I think that's the best answer to your previous question about so-called competition between jurisdictions.
No, thank you. And it brings me to one obvious follow-up question, maybe the final question, which is on the assumption the MOU can be developed, and maybe even though I agree with you, 100 days is impressive, but in crypto context, that might be still a bit tardy, and maybe needs, the MOU in the context of cryptos might require some quicker action, but I leave that to you. It opens up the possibility to something else on which IOSCO has been leading under your vice chairmanship and Ashley Alder's chairmanship, which is the whole work around deference. And not mutual recognitions, but deference. And even though that is maybe not on the cards right here, right now, what potential scope do you see for the use of deference in the medium term? Because you ideally also want market efficiencies whereby crypto exchanges in one jurisdiction can be accessed with the comfort of the supervisor of a host state where an individual investor or institutional investor might want to trade on that third country trading venue.
No, thanks for making publicity for defense, which is indeed, I would say, a part of the DNA of IOSCO. I would say there is no one-size-fits-all approach. Defense is an interest too. We have also the capacity to work with colleges, which are, I would say, a very well-known tool for supervision in Europe. I have the pleasure, for instance, to be a member of the Euronext College of Supervision with many other European colleagues. And it was also the case before, I would say, the demerge between Euronext and ISE, with also American colleagues. Let us be clear. This college was launched in the year 2000. So we are speaking about very well-known tools. We have also European passport. We can have also other aspects of mechanism. So the objective is to be helpful about capacity building. That's what we are doing also about sustainable finance. Due to the fact that we are a membership organization, the fact that we are working with different kinds of markets, sophisticated market, growing emerging market, it means also more possibility about capacity building, and that's absolutely instrumental when we speak about crypto assets, especially with direct link with, I would say, a protection of retail consumer. And I think that when you knock on the door of IOSCO, it means also a capacity to come back with principles which can be digested, implemented at different levels.
And to be honest, to praise you and not diverging from the subject matter, yes, the work you're doing on sustainable finance and then supporting the work of the ISSB there towards developing international standards is to be commended. That's for another conference. I know we regularly speak about that as well.
I will be back for that.
Exactly, in a different context. One very last question, as we still have a few minutes left, which is FTX. It's come up a lot of time. You've mentioned FTX. In a way, the conclusion I drew from when I asked you about the scope, in a way, if I again paraphrase, you looked less at the underlying instruments, you looked more at the entities and the structure of the entities and how they interact in driving your principles. But what would be, other than that it was involved some fraud or whatever else, but what would be your main conclusions so far from the FTX events for future action by IOSCO, and what does it tell us about the medium-term potential of the crypto market to enter the financial market infrastructure space?
Well, thanks for asking me the question. Of course, you won't be surprised if I'm telling you, Nick, that I don't intend to give comment about current investigation. So I will only limit my comment in my capacity as a IOSCO board chair to public information. But if I may, I would say two kind of comments. It's fascinating to see, and I see that also with the younger generation. And also from a political point of view, I see also the kind of comment in Belgium, for instance, I would say. Not that Belgium would be a kind of benchmark all around the world, but okay, it means, this business means, I would say, a kind of link with decentralization, disintermediation. But when you see what happened also with FTX, in fact, we have to say, to recognize to our knowledge that for the time being, we've ended up, I would say, with a relatively centralized market infrastructure. So there is, for me, I would say, a citizen of a teacher at the University of Brussels, a kind of disconnection with the element of language used to promote this business and what we see. Normally, you would expect a lot of decentralization, and it's not the case. And it means, I would say, a few crypto asset trading platforms at international level, or a service provider holding a significant percentage of the market share environment. That's very fascinating. So it means also, at least by definition, we need to be involved and to take action at international level. But it means also, that's my second comment, this so-called unexpected concentration means, and that's the reason why, of course, the FSB is also involved without any competition of overlapping with the IOSCO World 3. It means that this current concentration can amplify risk via a high level of interconnectedness. And in addition, we are also seeing a significant level of vertical integration, where multiple services and activities are performed by a single entity. In this case, you need to take action in order to avoid a question about possible conflict of interest, in order to ensure custody and client asset protection, in order to avoid additional operational technical risks. And that's the reason I would say, by definition, IOSCO needs to be on board, and we will be on board, and we will come back very rapidly, because some of these questions related, I would say, raise possible issue of conflict of interest and integrity.
No, thank you very much. I think it's interesting, particularly also at the time where I agree with you, there's some quite prominent players, but we also in this market see a lot of new players enter and drop out in regular intervals, and we have to see who will survive and who won't, who might become the infrastructure. So my only word of caution is today's prominent player might no longer be tomorrow's prominent player. So we have to see how the market evolves. But that is something we can take up when we come to the consultation. Jean-Paul, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. And I think it's really important to highlight the importance of IOSCO in this process, and that we've done this again. I think to say it is important, and it's come out of this conference already, and we pick this up again tomorrow when we speak to Alexander Schröder and the Undersecretary of the Treasury. Ultimately, these are global markets, these are global trends. And even though we might have European discussions, we cannot disconnect it from the global developments as much as we might sometimes think we can. So I really appreciate you being here with us. And I noticed you only mentioned Belgium twice. So you really put on your international hat today.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. See you soon, Jean-Paul. Thank you.